Or you're muted.
Everything was ready to go, and then we answered charter questions. So here we are. So give me just a second to try this again. We'll get set up. Welcome. I'm Laura Lutz Zimmerman. I'm one of the transit program administrators here at the Iowa DOT. My counterpart, Matt, as Amy mentioned, is out sick today. I sent him home because you guys didn't want to hear him and we didn't want to be around him. So thankfully, before we knew he was sick, we went ahead and split this presentation. So it worked out. We're just doing part one. You get me today, you'll get Matt next time. So we were talking about what was the next transit tidbits. And of course, the next transit tidbits hit right around year-end review. So they said, hey, let's do year-end review. Matt and I started thinking about, well, what does that mean for year-end reviews and what do we want the transit agencies to know as a part of year-end reviews? And we decided that really it starts at the beginning. So this is year-end review, starts at the beginning. Our plan for today is to really talk about the data that we collect starting at the beginning of the fiscal year and how that translates into the different functions that we do as an office and concludes with the year-end reviews. So you'll hear a lot of information today, which is why we ended up splitting it into part two, because we really had more than we wanted to cram into 30 minutes. And so this gives us a little more time to talk a little slower, to talk a little bit more in depth, and then to have more time to answer questions on both ends of the project. So bear with us as we split it into two pieces. The other thing that I will mention as we get started is that a lot of this information may be more geared towards the regional systems and the small urbans, because a lot of the information is tied to entry into the National Transit Database. And so for those reporters that do their own reporting, you'll probably benefit from it, but it'll be more geared towards those that we do the reporting for, so that we know the information we're getting in is accurate. All right. So year-end reviews, not just more busy work. There's a lot of reporting, a lot of things that you guys are responsible for, and a lot of things that we are involved in reviewing. And so what we don't want year-end reviews is to be more busy work. Well, instead, what we want is to have the transit statistics correct for our FTA and STA projections for formula. We also want to make sure that the transit statistics and the fleet information that we are reporting to National Transit Database are correct. And so with that in mind, there's really three goals that we're hoping to get out of this transit tidbits. The first is that we have accurate data going into our Black Cat and, and other areas where we're collecting that data, and we want minimal revisions as a part of that data. We also want to verify any compliance items that come out as part of the year-end review or functions within the DOT office. And finally, and this is the part I think that's most important for me, is that it's a check-in with our transit systems. If we do everything correctly, it should just be really a conversation about what it is that you're doing in your transit agencies. And then if there are issues that come up, we can address those. We can put new processes in place. We can streamline the existing processes. So again, I really view this as a conversation between the DOT and the transit agencies in order to make what we do better for you and for us. So I guess we start with schedule. So much of what we do is based on that. We did share this schedule at the IPTA presentation for those of you that were there. And we've also shared, at least in part, some of this information as part of the quarterly reminders that Matt and I put together. So where we start, the annual vehicle report is, those odometer readings are due on July. Let's try that again. Those odometer readings are taken on July 1st and those are due July 15th. We moved that up a little bit because mileage seems to be one of those areas that was giving us a little bit harder time. So we moved that up to begin the year-end reviews to start in July 15th. The bulk of the year-end reviews start after August 15th when we receive the rest of the transit statistics reports, fourth quarter, and then that rolls up into a year-end report that we then use for our year-end review. What our hope is to start those as soon as we can in August, with our year-end review questionnaires coming out on a rolling basis beginning in September. We'll focus on the regional and small urban systems first, and once those systems are complete, then we'll move into the large urban systems or the systems that do their own reporting within NTD. We ask a smaller subset of questions, and they don't take as much time as the small urban and regional systems because of what we put into NTD. We're hoping to have all the revisions completed in Black Cat by November 15th. Ideally, we're hoping not to have revisions, but we know that's not realistic. So we want all the revisions and the year-end reviews complete before Thanksgiving. And so we've set November 15th as our target deadline. The reason for that is to get funding projections finalized in December. And really what this all relates to is getting the projections put together for your consolidated applications and getting those to you in January so that we can get our grant applications into FTA before May 1st. And then that sets us up well to get our money in place from FTA starting the fiscal year. Just a reminder, and you'll hear this throughout, data accuracy is important, but any corrections in Black Cat statistics that go past November will result in delays for the formula projections for all agencies. And I know that over the last few years, you guys have experienced that. We are trying really hard to get back to a system that was in place pre-pandemic and before all of the staff turnover. So with that, we ask you guys to put a lot of information into Black Cat. We share those statistics in several categories. That information is translated into inputs for the National Transit Database, our funding allocation, and our PTMS ranking list. So correct reporting matters because if it's not correct, all three of those areas are affected. So we decided we'd start with basics. We talk about some definitions of what goes into Black Cat and how it comes out for NTD at the end, including operating costs, passenger revenues, contract revenues, other revenues, local tax, rides, and miles. So operating costs, what's included and where? In Black Cat, you know that you report operating costs. Those should include preventative maintenance and associated capital maintenance. Your operating costs should not include your planning expenses, capital expenses, or capital depreciation. Also, any refunds that you receive should be subtracted from your operating expenses. Within those Black Cat transit statistics, we want a separate line item for each contract and each type of service. And I'll note here, which isn't on the slides, but we want those to be reported consistently quarter over quarter. We want detailed, accurate names as a part of those service lines because it just helps us figure out what's going on and understand your system better with fewer questions for you during the year-end review. Also, charter and non-passenger services should be listed out separately, as well as your reimbursements that you get for your fellowships. NTD, on the other hand, reports these costs as funds expended by operation by mode and funds expended on capital by mode. As you know, capital expenditures are not captured within our transit statistics for Black Cat. And so for our small systems, we will be asking you to report those costs to us and we'll be verifying those against the reimbursements that we have submitted. If you're a larger system and you've received a reimbursement for whatever reason, we'll also verify that with you. But for the large systems, we just ask for the information as a part of the year-end review. Throughout this presentation, you'll see that we've included a few of the NTI slides from the National Transit Database training. A couple reasons for that, so you guys have the information that NTI has summarized from the National Transit Database policy reporting manuals. And so I've just included those really as a guideline for you. You guys will get these slides at the end, so it's a reference point and it gives you a spot to go back if you need to look something up. So a couple of things we wanted you to pay attention to with operating costs were the refunds. As I mentioned, refunds should be treated as a reduction to expenses and not revenues. So for those of you that get fuel tax refunds, you'll want to offset your fuel tax refunds and your operating costs. Your TPAs will verify within the financial documentation you provide when we're processing reimbursements that has in fact happened. But remember, for those of you who don't get fuel tax refunds, by Iowa code, you still must submit a quarterly tax report, and those are due 30 days after the end of the reporting quarter. This is one of those compliance items that we do sort of check on as we're working through the year-end review, so just wanted to bring that to your attention. Next area we're going to talk about is passenger revenue, and I forgot to move that. In Black Cat, as you know, and in our reimbursements, our passenger revenue includes fare box revenue and monthly bus passes that are sold. It also would include any donations that passengers may give while on the bus. NTD, on the other hand, reports fares, reports passenger paid fares and organizational paid fares. Passenger fares obviously are those paid by passengers on their own behalf, whereas organizational paid fares are paid for an organization rather than by the passenger. Why I bring this to your attention is that in NTD, Medicaid revenues specifically are reported as organizational paid fares. Within Black Cat, we report those in our contract because most of our agencies have contracts for those Medicaid fares. So as your TPAs, we look at your contract revenue lines and we subtract specifically the Medicaid. So we need to have the Medicaid service lines reported separately so that we can gather that data and report it as organizational paid fares in NTD. again, provided some examples of passenger paid fares and organization paid fares for you guys to look at, but I won't read through all of those. So let's talk a little bit about contract revenue. In Black Cat, the transit statistics, you report contract revenue for operations. It's one category. You just put it all there. And then based on your service lines, based on our understanding of your systems, your TPAs will take a look at that. Examples of contract revenue could be your Medicaid, could be paratransit, it could be contracts that you have with community action agencies or social agencies within your community. As I mentioned earlier, we want the Medicaid reported as a separate line so that we can pull that out and put it into NTD correctly. NTD, on the other hand, looks at contract revenue in a few different ways. If contracts pay the full cost of operation, those are reported as purchase transportation. So as we're looking at our paratransit, for example, we'll be comparing the operating cost to passenger revenue and contract revenue to see if that service is fully paid for. If it is, then it would be reported as purchase transportation within NTD. Also, one of the reasons we put together the paratransit guidance for you guys to look at so that we were consistently reporting that information, and it made it easier during year-end reviews for us to pick out how that should be reported in NTD. NTD also reports partial cost contracts as other directly generated revenue. And so we want all of you to enter your contracts in the contract revenue section in Black Cat. And then based on our reviews and if those costs are paid, we will allocate those to the correct location in NTD. So we do a lot of kind of categorizing, separating, going through those statistics, and that's how we generate the questions in our year-end review. Reminder down there at the bottom was pay attention to the paratransit guidance and the van pool guidance as we get it. As I mentioned at IPTA, we're working on it. It should be coming soon, but it didn't quite get done before we hit year-end reviews, and that's just the way life works sometimes. Oops. So a little bit more on contract revenue. I think I talked through most of this actually without the slide, is that your TPAs will separate that contract revenue and put it into NTD in the right location. You will probably be asked to verify some of the data just to make sure that we're putting it in the right place. And then again, the NTI slide that defines that, and that comes directly from the policy manuals for NTD. So talk a little bit more about other revenue. In Black Cat, we have other revenue for operations. We put all of the other revenue in there that you receive. NTD, on the other hand, breaks that into other directly generated revenue and other funds. Other directly generated revenue is any funds not included in directly generated sources that are common to all transit agencies. There's some examples, including concessions, the contract revenues, like we've talked about the partial paid contracts, donations that are received from an organization, but they're not received on the bus. So donations go into a couple of places where you're, depending on where you report. It could also be investment earnings, rental income, or sale of other assets. Primarily, our small and regional systems will have any other revenue that falls under the other directly generated revenue. There may be some instances where it could fall in other funds, but that's usually for larger systems or more complex systems than our small and regional systems. Other funds for NTD are government funding that's not dedicated to transit at the source or it is included in the budgeting process. Again, for small and regional systems, this would be rare. Some examples of that could include access fees. It could also include grants that you might receive, such as a CDBG grant. Again, you'll probably get questions from your TPAs as we're going through the year-end review, just to make sure that we're categorizing that revenue correctly as we enter it into NTD. Talk just a little bit about how NTD looks at other non-federal funds. So for Black Cat, we've got those grouped into several locations. They might be local funds, they might be state funds, they might be in other. Sorry, I read that backwards. Those for NTD. In Black Cat, you might be contract revenue for operations, local tax, STA for operations, or other revenue for operations. Whereas in NTD, they might be reported as local funds, state funds, or other. And so from those categories, again, we're looking at them and grouping them and putting them in the right place. So we'll be using the questionnaire to communicate with you to make sure we're reporting that information accurately. For your allocations, the contract revenue, local tax, STA, and other, not STA, those all get wrapped into your locally determined income. So they get used in a little bit different way, which is why they're broke out the way they are. And again, depending on which function we are in the office, we look at that information and differently. So it's important to know what's in those categories and to report them accurately so that we're using them for the different functions in the office. Local tax, local funds, NTD looks at those as financial assistance from local governments. This primarily applies more to our municipal systems or our government systems. You can have three different types of categories based on NTD. One is general fund revenue, so it might not be dedicated to transit specifically. It could be a line item in a budget. It could be part of your capital improvement plan. That's where then is coming from, as opposed to the next category, which is a tax. You have a transit tax that's directly dedicated at the source for those incomes. The third category are those other funds that we talked about that may be not dedicated or from the annual budget. So those could be those grants, or they could be collection fees, things like that. What I wanted to point out here is that if your transit agency receives funds from a local government but does not have a contract with the government agency, report those funds as local tax in Black Cat. That helps us understand where the revenue is and again puts them in the correct place for our NTD. Talk a little bit about rides and VOMs. Rides, as you know, total rides are tracked in Black Cat. Remember that a couple of years ago, we decided that we no longer needed to track elderly or disabled rides, so we only need total rides reported in Black Cat at this point. Those ride numbers you put in are then reported in NTD as unlinked passenger trips and sponsored unlinked passenger trips. Remember, when you're looking at your rides, that an unlinked passenger trip is the number of passengers that board public transit vehicles, and they are counted each time they board a vehicle, no matter how many vehicles they use from their origin to destination. So I just wanted to point that out when you guys are reporting. I don't know that we've had any issues, but I think it's always good to have that as a reminder. Sponsored UPT means that the fares are paid in whole or in part by a third party, often Medicaid. It's only reportable if it's part of a human services transportation plan. And in Iowa, that would be our passenger transportation plan. Finally, for those of you that are reporting demand response, remember that that sponsored UPT should also be included in the total for your unlinked passenger trips or UPT. All right, so VOMs, what to remember when counting. We have had a couple of instances with VOMs, so I just wanted to do a couple of reviews there. VOMs, or vehicles operating in maximum or an annual maximum service, must also be reported in NTD, but they're not reported in Black Cat. So this is a question that you will receive as part of the year-end questionnaire. We will just ask you to report VOMs. And so reminder that VOMs are based on the peak season of the year on the busiest day. What that means is that may not be all of the vehicles that you have available for service, only those vehicles that are operated on the busiest day in the peak season of the year. If those aren't operated correctly, it will flag in NTD because it won't match fleets if you go over or under, and they will call us and they will ask us, or they won't call us, I guess. They will flag it and say, why is this different? What did you change? This doesn't match. And so the more accurate we are up front, the fewer of those issues that happen when we validate the reports and submit an NTD. All right, so I want to talk about mileage just a little bit. I provided all of the definitions off to the side. I'm going to let you guys read those in your own free time because I know you have so much of that, just like the rest of us. But really, three reasons the vehicle miles are important. We record those vehicle miles in the annual vehicle report in Black Cat, and those miles are used as part of the PTMS ranking. So we really want them to be correct so that we're ranking vehicles correctly and the right agencies are getting the vehicles funded at the right time. The other thing that's important is the revenue miles that are reported in Black Cat are used in funding allocations. And finally, the revenue miles and the revenue hours are reported in Black Cat transit stats, but those are also used in the NTD calculations. And as I mentioned, we go through a validation process, so we enter all of that data. Once we go through that validation, the NTD automatically runs, I don't know, like 100 different calculations. I don't even know what the number is, but it's a lot. And based on those numbers, it can spit out speeds and asks about very nitty-gritty things that we have to go back and figure out what's going on in your system. So the more we know, the more it's reported exactly the same, the easier it is for us to flag issues ahead of time and not have to do it during the validation process with NTD. All right, so a few things to consider when recording miles. Your odometer miles that you report in the annual vehicle report should be the same as the vehicle miles that you report in your quarterly transit statistics. There should be little to no variation in these numbers. Those numbers are recorded on between June 30th and July 1st each year for the odometer recordings that go in the annual vehicle report. In Matt's section, he's going to go through more information on that. I'm just going to hit the highlights now. We use then the year-end mileage comparison report, which takes all the miles that you've entered in the 4 quarters, adds them up for the year end, and then compares them to the odometer readings. I point that report out because this way you can go in and take a look at that report if you want to and verify those miles before they get to us, just as a double check for you and us both. A couple things about revenue miles. Revenue miles are those conducted in revenue service. I presented the definitions on the previous slide. You can take a look at that. But basically, anything in revenue service would exclude non-reportable transit activity, including deadhead, charters, training, maintenance, fueling, and lunch breaks. When we're looking at miles, when we're looking at revenue miles, when we're looking at trips, we're looking for accurate data, and increases or decreases in the overall vehicle and revenue miles, as well as deadhead or other non-deadhead miles, may trigger questions as part of the year-end review process. So I wanted to point that out, knowing that that's a place that we focus and look, because it gives us a good idea if there are changes occurring in the system, your system specifically, or if there are changes occurring across all of the systems. It's also a metric for us to look across our transit agencies and identify if there are issues in the state that we need to look at policy changes or process changes that may help all of you. So with that, I'm just about done, and I will close out here with, here are the reports that Matt and I use as part of our year-end review. We're looking at your year-end quarterly transit statistics, which I mentioned start with first quarter. They go all the way through our fourth quarter, and they're compiled. That is a running total. So if you guys ever want to look to see where you are mid-year or 2/3 of the way through the year, you can always run that year-end quarterly transit statistics, and it will compile all of those from where you are at the year. We also look at the year-end mileage comparison report. That's the one that compares the vehicle miles to the odometer miles. We use the vehicle mileage comparison report, which tracks the miles for your vehicle that's in revenue service in Black Cat throughout the year so that you can compare to the previous fiscal year. We look at the annual vehicle report, which is really the odometer report, and then the revenue vehicle report. This is a good check for you to look at prior to entering in your annual odometer readings. Make sure all your vehicles are in the fleet or out of the fleet, and we encourage you to do that first. And then the last one is the year-end cost comparison report. If you're ever bored, and I'm sure you need some good bedtime reading, all of the information we presented today and as a part of our year-end reviews comes from these primary sources. We use the circulars as a guideline. We use the NTD reporting policy manuals. The uniform system of accounts, if you're really geeked out on numbers, is a great place to get tired and bored. So take a look at that one. And then obviously Black Cat and our Transit Manager's Handbook. So I appreciate you hanging out with us this morning and taking your time. There'll be a little bit shorter sessions today and on the 25th, just because we broke it up so that you weren't so overwhelmed. If you have questions, I'll take those questions today. Or if you have questions as you think about next week or the week after, send those in and we'll address those as part of part 2. And Matt will primarily carry us through part 2 on August 25th. With that, I am done for now, and we'll be open for questions.
This is Shirley with Riverbend. I have quite a few questions, but I'll just email you, Laura. But I guess
okay.
The main one is the miles issue. So we have 10 buses that are out in the county, and they come in for preventative maintenance checks. They come in for evals. They come in for quarterly trainings, and we allow them to bring their bus in. And anytime like they have an incident, they need to talk to the supervisor. So just like this year, I know there's a 6,300 mile difference between our odometer statement and our vehicle miles, because vehicle miles are in, transit service. So erroneously, I'm just going to be honest, I thought last year when I was contracted with Riverbend, they were supposed to, keep logs, and they didn't. So we started that absolutely as of July 1st, 2025. Is that still acceptable? Is it just a reconciling item? Because I don't know how to do anything different in that situation.
I think it's more of a reconciling item, and we wanted, in those cases where we were off, those amounts. We wanted the agencies to keep track of those logs just so that we could account for what's going on. So those logs would be the reconciling item. And if you have that and we can double check and say, yes, this makes sense, then it's a check mark, so that we know what's going on in the system is being reported correctly.
Okay, my
NTD.
second
And then
one
we
is-
can answer NTD, again, Kristen points out, we can answer NTD once those go into NTD. So yeah, that reconciling log is perfect. And we did last year ask the transit agencies where we had some larger differences to keep those logs for us, just so that we can keep track of what's going on this year.
Yeah, like I said, I thought they were, but we absolutely started it as of July 1st because I found out they weren't. So I guess my other question, just to clarify, because I guess I didn't know this, and this is probably just me being gone for a year and a half, we no longer have to report elderly and disabled in Black Cat.
That is correct. So some systems said that they would still report them regardless. So I would check with the agencies you contract paratransit with to make sure that they don't want that information tracked. But as a whole, DOT is no longer requiring elderly and disabled rides. It's up to the systems to report that if they choose,
my
and it's
question
required
then
by their
is-
agency.
Is that we are reporting because it's just easy. We have a report that tells us, but we do notice that when Davenport and Bettendorf enter theirs, they don't. That's not going to cause a problem, right?
Nope,
Okay.
because nope, it won't cause any problems.
Okay. Other than that, I do have another question, but that would be easier just to email you. But I do want to give a shout out, and I'm not, like I said, Laura, you have been a godsend. I've asked you some difficult bus questions and bus disposal questions, and you have answered me promptly and accurately. And I just want to say thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for that feedback. I really do want to be here to help the systems, and that's really my goal. So thank you for sharing that. Any other questions? I see we're kind of at 9:30, so I'm happy to take those if you guys want to stay on. And if you want to send those to us, we can tackle those at the beginning of next time.
Can I also note?
Oh.
So in the chat,
I wasn't checking chat, sorry.
no, in the chat, I put a link to the fuel tax reporting form that you guys will use this year. I had forgotten to email that out. Thankfully, we're still in the first quarter, so it's not a big deal. But I will email it out to all of you because not everybody's on today. But I also did put that in the chat for you. So that's the fuel tax reporting form you'll use for this fiscal year. They update the rates on an annual basis, I guess. So that's why we had to update the form. So I'll get that emailed out.
I guess one more question everybody, where do I get the slides for this so I can give them to staff?
Yep, I will actually answer that. I was
Perfect.
just getting ready to mention that too. I had a few people I know that will not be able to attend today's session. So once we get done recording and I edit out a little bit of it, I will send out the link that everyone can go to, which will be posted on our website with the rest of our previous transit tidbits that we have. That way anyone can watch them at any time. So I will send out the link when that is posted so everyone can view it.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. With that, thank you, Laura. I appreciate your presentation today, and we will hope to see you back on August 25th. Everyone have a great day and the rest of your week.
You too. Thank you.
All right.
Take
Thank
care.
you, everyone.
Thank you.